This is a panoramic view about Helicobacter pylori in Albania on regard of peptic ulcer disease and gastric cancer in this country and this population. Actually, in recent years, let's say about 25 years from now, Helicobacter pylori is strongly implicated as a primary etiological factor in the development of peptic ulcer disease. This is a picture of WGO. It's now the 90s, when we can see the difference of prevalence between Western and Eastern countries, between developed and developing countries. Most data most data taken from different studies relieve that in developing countries there is a very high seroprevalence of Helicobacter pylori if compared with the developed countries. And Albania is one of them. We have several studies, serological and histological studies. This is one of them during the 90s, when we found a prevalence of about 96, so it's about 100% of infection of Helicobacter pylori in Albania from the age of 20 to the age of 59 years in 4 subgroups. There is another study also beginning with kids under the age of 20, and also in this study we have a very high prevalence of Helicobacter pylori. We may say that Helicobacter pylori in Albania has the highest prevalence in Europe, maybe, in comparison with both Western and Eastern countries, which we have made comparative studies with Dr. McGraw, with 6 East European countries in the same period, same methodology, and the same ages, same groups. So you can see from this picture that the seroprevalence within these 6 East European countries in the same period of time is very prominent about Albanian population in all the ages. The last study that has been made, so this is a study of the 1995. After 15 years, we have this other study that we find the seroprevalence a bit lower, let's say about 70%, and it means that there is a change during this period from the 95 to 100%, and let's say maybe the negative people that we have in this table, maybe a false negative. We suppose that about 100% of the population of Albania during the early 90s were infected from Helicobacter pylori, but actually is in decrease because of changing the social, economical, and health system. These are the last data from WGO, when also Albania is one of the highest in Europe in comparison with Eastern and Western countries, but a bit lower, let's say about 20% lower than it was 15 years ago. During the beginning of the 90s, these are data from 1991, so about 15 years ago, at our university clinic of gastroenterology, we had about 60% of all inpatients with gastroduodenal ulcer. Mostly of them complicated. So we had a lot of 30% of them had pyloric obstruction, which in the Western countries was very rare during the 90s. It was something of 50 years ago. And then the other people with perforation, bleeding, and so on. As a consequence, we had an average of 2 patients per week undergoing surgical intervention during this period, end of the 80s and beginning of 90s. Actually, we have, during the last 3 years, we have 5 to 7% approximately admissions, always at the University Clinic of Gastroenterology. So we have a very important decline of admitting of hospitalization of peptic ulcer, less complications, less problems with peptic ulcer. During the last years, we have also made comparative studies between Albanian and Danish patients in the same methodology with the same type of patients, so approximately the same gender, the same age, the same relationship with alcohol, smokers, and so on. And here we find very big differences between the Albanian and Danish populations. So at the control group, we find above 90% of positivity at the Albanian, while Danish people were 25%. It's a very big difference. At the gastric ulcer, it's 77 to 55, while in duodenal ulcer, it's 94 to 73. At the gastritis, there are also a very high difference between the Albanian and Danish population. Well, on regard of gastric cancer is one of the most known malignancies from the ancient time. The first statisticals have been taken in Verona. Maybe even Napoleon suffered from gastric cancer. There is a question. And you see always this picture with his hand on the belly. Actually, the rate, the international data on the rate of gastric cancer make us see that Albania is one of the countries that have most gastric cancer in the world, and later on we shall see in Europe. There are different data, let's say, taken during the last 10 years in different methodologies, different companies, international companies, but always Albania is very high in gastric cancer. This is the map of the incidence, or estimated incidence, of gastric cancer for 2012, and mortality, where Albania is in the region of South Europe, has a very high mortality. We have made several studies, and at our clinic, the rate of gastric cancer on the persons performing upper endoscopy is relatively high, is more than 3%. And it is evaluated about 17 for 100,000 in total incidence. Bless you. We have exact data in Tirana. Tirana is the capital of Albania, has about 1/3 of the population of Albania, and is very heterogeneous. So in Tirana they live everybody from everywhere. We had, during the last 20 years, a lot of migration within Albania towards Tirana. So the population of Tirana, we may suppose that it's very similar to all Albania, but the specific data are in Tirana. We don't see a difference, so as we have seen a difference in peptic ulcer, declining peptic ulcer and complications, we don't see any change in malignancies. What we see is always, like most other countries, that dominates male against female gender. These are data taken from, the data are of the year 2012 from all the European countries, but so the most reliable that we had for ourselves were of Tirana 12-14. And in both genders, you see that Albania, Tirana in this case, is very high in incidence of gastric cancer in all the European countries. Also, you can see that dominate Europe, the incidence of gastric cancer is very higher in East, most East, and exception Portugal from the West. This is for the man, and for women. we have also a very high incidence of gastric cancer in women, which is very important because in the difference between the two genders, men and women, we find that Albanian women do not have other risk factors for gastric cancer, like, for example, smoking or alcohol, because Albania have a very conservative population. Women do not smoke very much, so it's very seldom. So it remains just the Helicobacter as a very primary, let's say, risk factor. Here is a study that was made on about 500 gastric cancer patients. There is the rate 2.3 of male towards female, the intestinal type, that's more often. The localization is more than 3/4, 78% is distal. And what we see in our patients, that is something very, very bad to say, is that we find in very advanced stages the gastric cancer. It means that also we find in 90% metastasis. So gastric cancer in Albania is discovered very, very late. Okay, so as a conclusion, I say that Helicobacter is a common infection through the population in Albania. Actually, we see in the last 20 years a decline of the infection. I may speculate that it's also accompanied with the decline of peptic ulcer and complications of peptic ulcer. But there is no change in gastric cancer, because if we can take into consideration that gastric cancer needs 20 to 30 years to be developed from Helicobacter pylori, then maybe we shall see less gastric cancer after 20 years, not now. Thank you.